Hey, greetings everyone. It is GleeCon, and I'm happy to be back here with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We have been plugging along and playing World of Warcraft Classic a lot. On our last one, we wrapped up a kind of a three-part mini trio of episodes, a phase of Red Ridge Mountains. I actually think we're kind of getting near the end of that region. We maybe only have one to two more circuits of that left, which is good. We've been there for a little while. We've also been reading the final Dungeons and Dragons campaign source book. It's the World of Warcraft role playing game, something they did right around the time of first when Warcraft 3 came out. Then they revamped it for World of Warcraft, and at this point, this book was published right in the prime of the Burning Crusade. So we're now on to the seventh chapter if you want to stay a while and listen. For so far, everything in this book we've been able to run through an entire chapter, but this book is called Dark Factions, and this chapter is called The Factions. As such, it is really the meat of the book. If I were to sit and do this entire chapter in one episode, it would be a minimum of 2.5 hours, maybe closer to 3 hours long. In that 2 to 3, that's a lot. That's a lot to sit and read nonstop. In the past, what we've done is taken this type of chapter and we've broken it up into its independent sections, which, while that will make for much shorter episodes, the episodes will run more on the 10-minute side, because there's a lot of factions. I think it would be better to have small chunks like that than it will be to just do a marathon episode. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at each of the different factions. I don't know that all of them are necessarily dark. And each of them come with certain elements that we'll notice. We'll touch on them this time, but all the other ones that come up, they will be the same. All right, so it starts off with Bran Bronzebeard introducing himself again with a little something called A Place for Everyone. The world is filled with all manner of people, and people like to get together and organize. Secret societies, small armies, circles of religious fanatics. Azeroth has them all. A few are crazy, some are disciplined, many are devoted, and all are interesting. I've done my best to learn about them. In the interest of furthering understanding, I've cataloged some details about them here. And this episode today we're going to do is going to be about the Argent Dawn. So it's a membership of approximately 1,500, and they're lawful good. So these guys are truly the good guys. Regions of influence. Typically, I think that means what region can you encounter them in the game and in the world. The Argent Dawn is a worldwide organization, but their centers of power are around the most dangerous places of the world. I discussed the organization in a previous work on the Alliance, but I feel some elaboration is necessary. The most Argent Dawn... I guess that's just a typo. The most Argent Dawn members are in the Plaguelands. They have bases at Chillwind Point on the border of Alterac and at Light's Hope Chapel to the west of Corin's Crossing. I've also seen a few Argent Dawn members in Winterspring and Mount Hyjal observing the actions of the Burning Legion and preparing for the next massive battle against the demonic army. They're a courageous lot. The Argent Dawn is full of self-sacrificing individuals who fight creatures most of the Alliance wouldn't even want to think about, and probably doesn't, sadly. And I mean, as you fan out around the world, that's true, because in the closer regions, they're fighting orcs, they're fighting gnolls, and really the big problems are, sure, the Scourge, but even more so the Forsaken. I mean, the Burning Crusade, Burning Legion. The Argent Dawn seeks to liberate locations that have been taken over by the Scourge, the Burning Legion, servants of the Old Gods, and other forces that prove dangerous to the remainder of the world. They move from place to place, although by necessity the organization has a few stable headquarters, both in major cities such as Darnassus and at more humble locations such as the semi-permanent encampment near the tomb of Uther the Lightbringer. The Templar of the Argent Dawn are would-be heroes. They seek to succeed where the Silver Hand failed. In an effort to adapt and compensate for the problems of the past, the Argent Dawn uses some unusual methods. Their most devoted members, the Templar, are known to sacrifice many of the abilities of their former professions for new ways of manipulating the Holy Light. Their unpredictability makes them especially dangerous to undead and demons. They prove capable of devising new tactics and new spells faster than most of the Lich King's servants can keep up. Sadly, the numbers of the Argent Dawn are few, and each fallen knight is a terrible blow. The Argent Dawn believes that with greater support from the outside world, it could teach others better ways to combat the darkness, but the Argent Dawn finds that few are willing to sacrifice their ideals and existing power. It's a pity, but I doubt the Argent Dawn will ever get the support it needs. And I don't think it does. I mean, there are some bigger versions, but it's a neutral faction, and you can do some things, but it is in very isolated parts of the world. I think Wrath of the Lich King, you get another version of them, and other than that, you just have you have these couple little bastions. All right, history. I still don't know how the Argent Dawn came to be. Some say that Lord Maxwell Tyrosus, once a mighty knight, founded it in disgust after Arthas's betrayal. At first, most believed the Argent Dawn to be a new subsect of the Silver Hand, but swiftly it became evident that they had developed some unusual, different principles and methods. For example, many are known for having cast-off paladin armor to find ways to turn the holy light toward destructive uses. Since the Argent Dawn is a recently created organization, the public knows little about it or its hierarchy. Some see the Argent Dawn as a sign of hope, others as another failure. A few think of the Argent Dawn as insane, associating them with the much better known Scarlet Crusade, another anti-undead organization based in the Plague Lands. I'll admit both groups are strange, but that's about as far as the similarities go. I mean, they're also both paladin offshoots. Okay, so we're going to do a sidebar on adventure hooks and how they apply to this chapter. At the end of each faction description are a couple adventure hooks involving that faction. These hooks are intended to spark your imagination and give you the heroes jumping off points for further adventure. They're simply ideas you might use in your home campaign. In all likelihood, the events described in the adventure hooks will never occur in the world of Warcraft. However, since this is your chance to control Azeroth, feel free to go even further with your adventures. So that's what, as we read the adventure hooks with each section on these little mini episodes, that's the caveat. Keep in mind, for the most part, these are going to be non-canon, just concept ideas. While the Argent Dawn is a neutral organization, some of its founding members were once Knights of the Silver Hand, and as such, they still hold some level of influence within the Alliance. The Alliance honors them with offices near the Cathedral of Light in Stormwind, and their own headquarters in Darnassus, as well as smaller buildings in other cities. Some members of the Argent Dawn still hold a fair bit of political sway, but most have distanced themselves from the Alliance in the last few years as the battles with the Horde have intensified. Yeah, so this is where we're talking about the different relationships that the organization has, and we get a cool picture. Looks like we've got two human paladins. They're both fighting / impaling the Scourge. We have another one in the forefront fighting even more Scourge, and it looks like, oh, that's just, this guy's bent over, and he is also fighting, or I can't even tell which, maybe they're both, but it looks like we have a pack of 4 to 5 Argent Crusaders, and they all look to be human, and they look like they're fighting some undead. It's a pretty cool picture. The Horde has a healthy relationship with the Argent Dawn as well, but it does not actually serve as a sponsor for the faction's activities. Rather, the Horde, especially the Forsaken, reinforces the Argent Dawn's troops, and otherwise works with them when doing so seems beneficial, which is usually the case since the Argent Dawn works heavily in the Plague Lands, and the Horde wants to see the Scourge burned to ash as much as anyone. I personally find it a bit strange that the Argent Dawn, so-called undead slayers, are willing to work with the Forsaken, but I suppose desperate times call for desperate measures. Duke Nicholas Sverenhof in Light's Hope seems to consider the prospect of actually winning against the Scourge in the Plague Lands preposterous. I wonder what he's fighting for then. The Cult of the Damned and the Shadow Council constantly attempt to infiltrate the Argent Dawn to disassemble it from inside, but thus far their attempts are unsuccessful. Well, or so successful we haven't figured it out yet. I know that the Cult of the Damned and probably the Shadow Council are both other factions we'll have many episodes on. The Scourge and the Burning Legion have certainly noticed the Argent Dawn, but they've not yet taken further action against it. Kel'Thuzad seems to be biding his time, and the Scarlet Crusade is a greater annoyance to him for now. The Scarlet Crusade has similar goals as the Argent Dawn, but since most of the Crusaders are zealous bigots, the two organizations often come into conflict anyway. Recently, a small group of members of the Scarlet Crusade has taken up residence in Light's Hope Chapel to coordinate with the Argent Dawn in opposing the Scourge. While tensions remain high, Commander Eligor Dawnbringer of the Brotherhood of the Light, a subsection of the Argent Dawn, manages to keep relations from growing violent. I'm honestly not sure how much the two groups will accomplish, but with a major attack from Kel'Thuzad looking imminent, they'd better learn to reconcile their differences sooner rather than later. The Scarlet Crusaders at Light's Hope seem obsessed with finding a weapon called Ashbringer, which we read a cool comic on, which Eligor insists is foolish. Apparently he was there when the weapon was lost. Apparently a man by the name of High Lord Mograine carried the Holy Blade, but his son betrayed and murdered him. I don't know much more about the situation, sadly, but it seems like the Argent Dawn and the Scarlet Crusade are more closely connected than I thought. I asked Eligor for more information, but he just shook his head and told me that he couldn't say much more. But I could go to someone else who knew more, Fairbanks. I'll have to look up this Fairbanks later. Okay, we have another sidebar called Heroes and the Argent Dawn. Members of the Argent Dawn focus on combating evil in every form. Members are expected to contribute in any way they can. Recent initiates are expected to work with other members to prove themselves, but the organization doesn't have strict guidelines for how long this must be done. Few things are mandatory within their organization. Most field agents strive to become Templar, a title which designates a high level of authority within the organization. At this point, the member can usually go where she pleases and wields a fair amount of influence. Members can exchange items called Valor tokens for a variety of magic items from the Argent Dawn's vaults, as well as for favors and services, such as having a member of the Dawn cast a spell at your request. The organization expects its members to check in constantly and let their leaders know what they're up to, but it doesn't keep anyone on a tight leash. That being said, a person's position in life outside the Argent Dawn is independent from her rank within it. A high-ranking lord joining the Argent Dawn is expected to follow his superior's orders regardless of his influence elsewhere. Okay, the organization. I didn't know much about the Argent Dawn's organization when I wrote my report on the Alliance, and I still don't know much. As best I can figure it, Lord Tyrosus is the nominal head of the organization. Each location has its own separate hierarchy, so it's not particularly clear to an outsider, nor is it all that important. Suffice to say that the Argent Dawn has captain types, lesser officers, elite members called Templar or Crusaders, and normal members in most locations. A smaller group within their ranks is called the Brotherhood of the Light and seems recently formed. Eligor Dawnbringer is a member, as is a massive warrior named Corfax. I don't know much more about them, and I'm assuming those will be like quest givers that we roll with when we get to those endgame kind of zones. As will be the grind for Valor tokens if we're into that. Okay, locations. I've already mentioned all the major bases of operations for the Argent Dawn. The Plague Lands serve as the sad home for most of the Argent Dawn's members. They fight the Scourge on every inch of land, hoping to wear down the undead and break Kel'Thuzad's grasp on the northern side of the Eastern Kingdoms. That reminds me, Magni, we need to put up a good tavern for those lads and lasses in Ironforge, make them feel real welcome. Then maybe we'll actually start getting some information that doesn't come from the Explorers Guild for a change. After all, knights get drunk just like everyone else. Members. The Argent Dawn draws members from both the Alliance and the Horde, but not equally. They focus on the Holy Light, and it makes the organization more appealing to the Alliance, especially to people with a background with the Church or the Silver Hand. Magi also support and sometimes join the Argent Dawn since they have similar goals. Young members collect Scourge Stones to show their mettle, but more dangerous missions like purifying Kel'Thuzad's plague cauldrons on the farms in the Western Plaguelands or delving into Stratholme are likely to get some attention. So basically they're telling you how to get rep. Leaders. Lord Maxwell Tyrosus is a male human. Lord Maxwell has been a member of the Argent Dawn for some time. He's only a little over 40 years old, so he'd barely be an adult by Dwarven standards. As a human, he's starting to show his age, though he's still a valiant fighter. There's also Commander Ashlam Valorfist, another male human. This young but battle-scarred veteran works with the Argent Dawn at Chillwind Camp. As an ambassador from Stormwind, he misses the greener lands of his home. Still, he's determined to see the Plaguelands cleansed of blight and the Scourge driven back. His recent focus has been on a graveyard just outside the camp's borders, but due to recent successes from outside help, he's been pushing the front toward Anderhall lately. And there is High Priestess McDonnell, a female human. High Priestess McDonnell attempts to remove the taint of the Scourge upon the Plaguelands, and with the help of an alchemist named Arbington, she meets with limited success. She discovered that Kel'Thuzad maintains the Scourge with massive cauldrons placed on the farms in the Plaguelands. These cauldrons emit diseased clouds that contaminate the land. Fortunately, McDonnell and Arbington believe an experimental potion can reverse this effect, but they haven't had the manpower to try it yet. And here's our little adventure hooks. Lord Maxwell Tyrosus calls for a strike against Baron Rivendare in Stratholme. Argent Dawn members gather from around Azeroth and bring allies for a massive assault. Okay, so that would be a hook to get you to do the Stratholme dungeon. A Forsaken Enchanter wants to study Argent Dawn magic items. He hires a group of Horde heroes to procure some of these items, whether through force or guile, or through grinding those Valor tokens. So, again, you could build something around that. And that's it for the Argent Dawn. As you can see, that's just one of like 20 or so factions that are discussed in this, maybe even more, 25. So it would take a long time to read them all. So it's better, I think, to break them down like this. But we've got another episode in the pipe 5x5. I thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.